Chair, I have with me Nerida Saunders to my right, and behind Craig McCauley from the Division of Aboriginal Affairs and Reconciliation, and once again Andrew Swanson and Caroline Meelaw from Attorney General's Department.
Thank you. And does anyone else have an opening statement or any questions? You have questions? Member for Hyson, yes.
Thanks very much, Chair, and thanks to all here attending. And Minister, if I might start by directing attention to Budget Paper 4, Volume 1, at page 17. We see there the program summary for Program 1 within the Attorney General's Department, which is Aboriginal Affairs and Reconciliation. And the program summary, first of all, going over the page to the top of page 17, we see the net cost of providing services at the penultimate line, and we see there that the 24-25 budget was a tick under $1 million over the actual amount of net costs for 23-24, which was 12.2 million. Budget for 24-25 was 13.4 million. The estimated result for 24-25 was 15.5 million net cost of providing services. So $2.1 million of, and I've used the word before, a budget blowout or additional expense on a budget of 13.4, significant amount of additional expense. Is there any particular reason for this significant overspend to budget?
It is answered quite extensively in the explanation for the significant movements immediately below it. In both of the years the member referred to compared to the next year, there were carryovers approved. But the increase in the expenses from 24-25 estimated result compared to the 2024 budget is in fact the majority of it is primarily due to a carryover, but also in relation to additional funding of 0.4 million for closing the gap, and an increase in the grant funding to SACON of 0.3 million dollars, which, when you add all of those together, the 1.4 plus 0.7 takes you to $2.1 million. And of course, yeah, the refresh of closing the gap in the current model was something that was, and I pay tribute to it, signed up to by the former Liberal government after the original closing the gap targets were refreshed. There are significant work that the state has done and continues to do in relation to that, and we see additional funding for that. Was it?
And the minister's one step ahead of therefore where I was heading, and I appreciate it might save the committee some time, in that we see there in that first paragraph indeed that there's those two items of additional funding for closing the gap and for SACON of 400,000 and 300,000 respectively. But dealing with the carryover of funding, and perhaps also the minister's referred to that not being the first time that's occurred. What's the reason for the carryover, and how do we see that explained, I guess, by reference to the actual in 23-24 and then the budget in 24-25 and then the estimated result, each of them increasing year on year? Is it due to less than anticipated activity each year and then carry over with additional
I'm
provision?
advised that it's multifaceted. There are a number of reasons. Some of the reasons are not having filled some but not many positions within the department that have allowed for a carryover to be requested and made, but also some of the funding programs, for example, for Aboriginal monuments and statues, reflecting when they are going to be delivered. The program is well underway, but of course, in the budgeting sense, you allocate a certain amount each year, and if it doesn't happen in that year, but it is going to happen, carryovers are often requested for and asked for, particularly for things that it's not that it's not going to be delivered. It's just it's not going to be delivered in that time frame that had originally been budgeted, allocated.
And we now move to the second paragraph of the explanation. Interestingly, so the first paragraph of the explanation doesn't include that reference to Aboriginal monuments and statues. The second does, and insofar as that's 500,000. My recollection was that in the first budget on the current government coming in, there was provision for 250,000 in each of the 4 years.
I can't remember, but it was something like that. It was $1 million all up, and I think it was, as it's done, allocated evenly over the forward estimates. Perhaps with hindsight, knowing that there is a significant degree of planning that needs to go into this, not just in terms of physically deciding what the statue will be, where it will go, the permission to go where it's going to go, but of course consultation with the family of that Aboriginal person, which is exceptionally important. That it might have been rather optimistic to start expending that in the very first year, but yes, that is my recollection, that the way it was allocated was reasonably evenly over the 4 years, I think, and that's certainly given rise to carryovers.
And I don't mean this in any particular pejorative way, but I've raised the question about whether the carryover funding year on year is a reflection of a certain amount of inactivity or the non-deployment of funds anyway, if inactivity is not the right term, but that would include the monuments and statues program. It's a good example of a non-spend of money in previous 2 or 3 or 4 budgets.
I think it's probably a particularly good example because it's an indication. It's not as if there's not activity happening, and it's not the case that the money's just going to be kept and not spent. It is going to be spent, but the way it's been apportioned between budget years has meant that it hasn't been spent early in those years.
Just while the attorney's getting some advice, I note that the member for Colton has asked to be discharged to be replaced by the member for Bragg.
Thank you.
Excellent replacement.
That's refreshing. So I noticed that the Minister was referring to something along the way. I was anticipating an answer, but nothing more to add?
No. Well, do you want to get that? I can, in terms of the allocation of the budget, I'm advised it was, the honourable member was partially right in his recollection. It was split over a number of years. It was 2 lots of 500 rather than 4 lots of 250 over the 22, 23 and 23, 24 budget years.
Okay.
But
yeah.
The result is the same in terms of...
That makes that 500,000 then more directly referable to 1 year's allocation. Well, and if that's then to be explained by way of a carryover, as I read the second paragraph, that that might be ambiguous in the second paragraph. Is it to be? Is it actually part of the 1.4 that's carryover, or is it that is it that 500,000 allocated in a previous budget hasn't been spent, that has gone away, and there's now new funding of 500,000, or is it part of the 1.4 carryover?
My advice is that the 0.5 of a million in that second paragraph for Aboriginal monuments and statues is not included in the 1.4, but it had been moved to that year, and I'm happy to take away and see if it might have been a carryover from the year previous, perhaps. But it's not included in the 1.4, but it's not money that went away and had to be sought for again. It's the money that was there previously, but it's not in the 1.4. But exactly how that's accounted, I'm happy to find out for the honourable member.
All right. Well, I guess my curiosity is why it finds its way into the second paragraph at all. If it's spent in the sense that it's sitting in Aboriginal Affairs and Reconciliation and earmarked for deployment, or committed, or contracted, or so on, that would make sense in circumstances of it not having gone further than that. But it's included in this explanation of the increase in expense for the 24-25 estimated result. So I flag I'm just not 100% clear on how that's derived. Do we go back to the previous budget where the 500 first appeared?
I don't have that information with me now from that previous budget, but I will take that on notice so I can provide some clarity on that.
All right, thanks. And then to the broader point, then really the thrust of the question in more general terms. What is it possible for the minister to explain to the committee how the funds that are the subject of the carryover, the 1.4, is there any particular area of, I've described it a couple of times as inactivity or not deploying funds, what areas of budgeted activity does that actually work for? And is there a means of explaining, therefore, oh, well, the program's been, not active as much as anticipated in this discrete area, or is it a sort of a general, a generalised, inactivity?
I might, just so I can provide as much clarity as possible, take that on notice to look at the constituent part of that 1.4 and bring back a reply for the member. All right,
thanks. And in the same vein, and maybe this is an opportunity for the minister to add any relevant information in this regard. I wasn't taking too many clues from the final line of that table, the FTEs, at least as far as 24-25 budget to 24-25 estimated result is concerned. But there is a significant movement of FTEs from 23-24 to estimated result 24-25 and to budget. So the relatively minor actual 23-24 to budget 24-25 increase in net cost of providing services wouldn't perhaps be fully explained by the FTE change, but it's certainly not explained by the FTE change from budget 24-25 to estimated result 24-25, is it?
Yeah, my advice is in relation to the difference you see there, and I'm guessing some of the questions will be what's been the dramatic increase in the need for FTEs, because it is a third more in the 39.4, 40.3 and 39 than the 31, significantly more. My advice is for the 23-24 year, due to difficulties in filling all the roles, there were 6.8 FTE vacancies that year. So if you had 6.8 filled there, you would have had 38.7, which would have been very, very similar to the other years. So my advice is it was in relation to vacancies that hadn't been able to be filled that year at that time.
So that might have gone some way to explaining the carryover in that year, but it doesn't go very far to explain carryover.
I'll go and get some further and better details on that.
All right. So I'm back to page 16. And just before I do, while we're talking about, by reference to either the net cost of providing services or to the activities, highlights and targets generally, it's a matter that I've flagged with the Minister. I'm conscious that part of what the Attorney General's Department is doing in the course of its responsibilities vis-a-vis Aboriginal heritage in South Australia is providing information services, including seminars and getting around the state. I invite the Minister to reflect on the extent and cost and nature of those services. But in terms of any programs of education in relation to Aboriginal heritage, has there been any change that might require any change of practice among landholders, farmers, pastoralists, including result of any legislative changes?
I thank the member for the question. In terms of my advice is there hasn't been any change in the way that education programs or roadshows or the sort. I understand that when organisations request people from Aboriginal Affairs to come and talk to them and engage about how Aboriginal heritage works, they respond, and I'm informed that happens from time to time with people who, whether in the primary industries area, mining area, wind farms are another area that interact a lot significantly with the Aboriginal Heritage Act. I'm informed that when requests are made from people, if it can be accommodated within their workloads, the Aboriginal Heritage team at the department try to respond to those requests that are made to come along and provide information or sessions. So it's not a roadshow that's going around continuously, but certainly where able, I'm advised the department's very keen to make themselves available to inform the community and different groups as much as possible.
And I wonder, and that's rather more, with respect, accurately and elegantly expressed than what I'd just done. I didn't mean to flag anything new in terms of roadshow. If that's appropriately in response to requests, then, as I understand it, that's what's occurred. And in the course of the last year, in those activities, has there been any cause for raising of anything new, the result of legislative change? But I think it's clear that there's been recent legislation that's increased penalties for breaches that have been of long standing. But is there anything new that's actually been added to the range of activities?
Yeah, I think I understand the question.
Yeah.
I think if I answer, yeah, is there, as a result of, there was, I think on the September 2024 legislation passed both houses of parliament and changes came into effect on 1 January this year. In terms of the scope of the remit and the protection of the Aboriginal Heritage Act, nothing has changed. Anything that was protected before there were some changes to the fines is similarly protected afterwards. Anything that the Act doesn't cover, still doesn't cover. So in terms of the activity that landholders can undertake, in that sense, there has been no change. What there has been a change to, and I think there have been changing attitudes in the community over time, particularly when you look at the destruction of cave art at Yunkin Gorge and other such matters, is a change in the fines in South Australia. So it was an election commitment, and there've been significant increase with up to $2 million for companies and $250,000 or 2 years imprisonment for individuals who intentionally or recklessly damage or disturb Aboriginal heritage. There is now also a lower level fine, recognising that these sorts of big fines for that intentional or reckless may not be appropriate. A lower level offence is created with penalties of $50,000 companies or $10,000 fines for individuals who damage, disturb or interfere with Aboriginal heritage, but there is a defence available if the person didn't know or could not reasonably expect it to know and it was Aboriginal heritage. So, the fines have changed. In terms of what's covered, absolutely no change. The sites and objects that were covered under the Act in 2023 are the sites and objects that are covered under the Act in 2025 and 2026.
Just further to that, so the scope, the activities haven't changed. No. Have the management or the policing, for want of a better word, the oversight structures changed at all, or it's same?
My advice is no, that has remained constant. There are authorised officers that can conduct investigations, and they happen from time to time. That hasn't, the policing in effect of the provisions hasn't changed either, is my advice.
So there haven't been any further directions of those authorised officers to
beef up and increase? No, there hasn't been. In my experience, having worked in Aboriginal affairs and with the Heritage Act for more than 2 decades now, it's often either traditional owner groups or others that will bring information to the department, and then the department will investigate. But there's not some new unit that is going out proactively. It is as it has been in the past, and the scope of what's protected hasn't changed either.
Thanks.
In terms of the net cost of providing services and the capacity to respond to those requests, is there, and this might just be a means of illustrating one aspect of Aboriginal Affairs Reconciliation's work, a cost associated with such responses? Who's involved? Is there a dollar an FTE?
For investigations.
No. For the what I inaccurately described as roadshow, but the minister more accurately described as capacity for Aboriginal Affairs and Reconciliation to respond to a request for participation in a seminar.
Do you mean in relation to Aboriginal heritage matters?
Yes. In relation to what we've just been talking about.
My advice that I sought earlier is that is the just a function that is ordinarily undertaken. That there hasn't been a dedicated line or FTEs put on to do that, but it is within the existing budget as it has been in the past.
Yes. Okay. And so to underscore that, it's been a part of Aboriginal Affairs and Reconciliation's work for a period that has been of now many years. I mean, we know the old Act has been in place since '88, and it's been amended along the way lots of times, but there's no budget allocation, FTE allocation, or any significant change in activity that might be referable to pre and post September 24.
My advice is in relation to those changes that were made in relation to the amount of the fines, and the changes that were made to the Act. There hasn't been anything budgeted or put in or done differently. And as we traversed before, the scope remains the same. You know,
Yeah.
any Aboriginal site or object that was protected pre these changes is still protected post these changes. It hasn't increased the scope of how the Act applies in that respect.
And a good demonstration of that might be to use a set of circumstances that have arisen before so far in the course of these committees. We might have been finding ourselves talking about something that doesn't appear in either the targets or the highlights for that reason. Yeah. If I then stay with that table on page 16, highlights for 24-25, and they include as the first dot point highlight the support for the implementation of South Australia's First Nations voice to Parliament at a local and state level. How has Aboriginal Affairs and Reconciliation worked with the First Nations voice to Parliament in terms of the providing of that support?
For the First Nations voice?
Yes. And how's that sounded in terms of cost and FTE deployment?
I can advise that in terms of the support provided for the elected First Nations voice, it's approximately the Secretariat that supports that elected body. Totals approximately $700,000 a year. I'm advised that 24-25, the budget is 690, rising 25-26 to 701, 26-27 to 711,000, and 27-28 to 725,000.
And the FTE?
One moment, please. Do we have that there? Is it four-ish people? Four people-ish. I'm advised that it comprises 6 FTEs.
That's 6 FTEs of the...
Voice Secretariat.
Sorry?
The Voice Secretariat.
Yeah. But what I was about to say was of the FTEs in the program summary table.
Are they included in here? So the question is, the program summary number of FTEs, are they included in there? My advice is yes, they are.
Yeah. So and I recall there was a time, and there's nothing controversial about it for the moment, but there was a time, I think, where the voice and its associated bureaucracy was possibly going to be wholly outside of Aboriginal Affairs and Reconciliation.
I don't think there was ever a time where that was happening.
No. So to the extent that was ever a consideration.
No, so I'm not aware of it, and as Minister, I would probably be aware of it. So
yeah, that's right.
I'm not aware that
Oh,
was,
that's all.
was considering that.
That's all as stated as recently as just now. Those FTEs are within Aboriginal Affairs and Reconciliation, and then for completeness, in terms of the 23-24 actual, the Minister's referred to the 6.8 FTE that were vacancies at that time. How many, if any, of those 6.8 FTE vacancies were Secretariat vacancies?
So what's this? But I'll have to take that on notice. For those 6.8, it's just so I've got the question right that I'm taking on notice of the I think it was 6.8 vacancies that I mentioned in the 23-24 actuals.
Yes.
The question is, how many of those were attributed to the Voice Secretariat? Yeah, I'm happy to take that on notice.
Great, thanks. And it might be the same question, but it might just be another way of getting there, and the information might be available. How long have the 6 FTEs at the Secretariat been engaged?
My advice is recruiting commenced after the Act passed and ramped up once elections had occurred.
Yeah, well, just taking that as read,
Yep.
we might revert back to the question you've taken on notice. But it's a possibility, at least at the moment, that the 6.8 FTE
Yep.
vacancies as at actual 23-24 might have included some.
Look, if there are 6 people, it may have included some.
Yeah.
I'm
But it
happy
wasn't
to go
all
check.
of them. It wasn't. There was some
When did
engagement of FTE by then at the Secretariat.
Yeah, my advice, and this is just off the top of people's heads, so if it's different, I'm happy to go away and bring back another answer, that the inaugural head of the Secretariat of the Voice started around November 2023.
Yes.
And then, other staff came on after that. So at least if it's November 23 and we're talking 23-24 financial year,
Yeah.
there would have been 4 or 5 months where there wasn't. Commenced on 8th of January 2024, the head of the Voice Secretariat. So for half of that time of the 2023-2024 financial year, the head of the Secretariat and then the other staff hadn't commenced. But in terms of the actual numbers and how they influence the vacancies, I'm happy to take on notice.
Okay, and I'll move off this in a moment, but that just means, to be clear, that we've got 6 FTEs engaged at the Secretariat as at right now.
That's my advice.
And that's the plan, that's the final, that's the full complement. And as at January 2024, there was one key appointment that had been made to that Secretariat, and that we're filling in the gaps together. That as at 23-24 actual, we know that the whole Aboriginal Affairs and Reconciliation had a 6.8 FTE vacancy, and it's just then how many of that 5, as at that time,
So if there was no one there for half the year, that would account for half of the vacancy almost.
or most of the vacancy.
Oh, that's a point. Sorry. It's FTEs at a point in time, so it's not rolling and accounting for half the year. That's why we will need to check.
And I'm only assuming in that because you're ramping up FTEs and because of such a short time frame, it's not as rolling as it might be if we were talking about, the FTEs over the page on within
it may well, and it stands to
the Office
reason.
of the DPP, for example.
It may well, and it stands to reason, to account for some of those, but given, as it's been pointed out to me, that FTE count isn't the average number of people over the whole of that year, so you can't apportion half the year to half a position. It's as at the 30th of June on that date, and we don't have those figures here with us today.
Got it. And this might be a short answer. Indeed, might already been, but for clarity, what functions, if any, does Aboriginal Affairs and Reconciliation undertake to assist the First Nations voice, other than contain within it the Secretariat for the First Nations voice?
My advice is it's largely the administrative type support that's provided by any department that has people sitting within them. I do note that from time to time when there's that needed with programs, there are officers from the Premier and Cabinet as a whole of government agency that help coordinate particularly the meetings with ministers that the members of the Voice have. But in terms of the support, the Secretariat sitting administratively within Aboriginal Affairs, they provide that administrative support. But they're the ones who organisationally support the Voice.
Yes, and so that's what we can read as what the first dot point item means. Supported the implementation of South Australia First Nations Voice to Parliament at a local and state level means
means that,
apply to Secretariat
well, yeah,
to,
those
to
who
the tune of
provide the
$700,000
Yes.
that employed 6 FTE,
Yep.
and that's what that support means. Bearing in mind those other connecting.
Look, I'm sure there, as I said, administrative, your payroll, those sorts of ancillary supports that you provide anyone who works in a department, but it is that Secretariat who provides that.
Yeah, and just while being somewhat specific about it, given that it's expressed as a highlight of 24-25,
Yep.
supporting the implementation,
Yep.
might it just as well be described as supporting the operations of, the functioning of the South Australian First Nations Voice, or indeed, might it just as well be described as provided the Secretariat of, given that it's now relatively long established?
I wouldn't describe it as relatively long established after only a couple of years, but
Sure.
it might well be described in a whole range of different ways.
Yeah, okay, but there's nothing that's associated with, as it were, implementation as such that is materially or significantly outside of Secretariat functions year to year.
Well, given the Secretariat sits within Aboriginal Affairs.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So when one reads implementation, one might be tending towards a kind of a phases that move from implementation to ongoing functioning and so on. I don't mean to stay to it.
We are, it is a matter of semantics
Yeah, maybe.
to a large degree, but certainly the implementation of the First Nations Voice to Parliament that the Secretariat provide that support in doing, there were elements of it that happened for the first time in that year. For example, that first address to the joint houses of Parliament, the first meetings with the Cabinet, and then the subsequent meetings with different groups of ministers on different policy areas.
Right.
So, I wouldn't in any way describe it as long established. It's still relatively early. So there are still elements of how it functions that over certainly the 24-25 year have been happening for the first time. So
Okay.
I think it's probably correct to say implementing in some respects as well.
And they might those examples that the minister's given might come at a cost, but I think they're also examples of things that are recurring.
Indeed, but a lot of these are in that year occurring for the very first time. So
Okay.
if you're talking about being implemented,
Okay.
that may be a fair way to describe it.
And for completeness, when one turns to the targets 25-26, the final dot point of targets talks about continuing in the same sort of vein, but now moves to, rather than supporting the implementation, supporting the operations of. And we're talking, as the Minister said, about what might be semantics, but there's been a semantic choice made in the expression of the budget papers.
Yeah, sure. And I think in 25-26 as compared to 24-25, most of the things that happen are things that have happened before.
Okay.
So I guess that's probably a reasonably fair way to describe it.
All right. And I think it's already been pretty thoroughly answered, but the cost of support for implementation and the support for operations sounds in terms of that $700,000 rising to $725,000 figures that the minister's just now given, more or less wholly by reference to the cost of the Secretariat.
That's my advice, yes.
Yep. Still on Budget Paper 4, Volume 1 at page 16, and staying with highlights and targets, therefore, we see to return to the topic really, but perhaps in a bit more specific way, highlights for 24-25 include, as the second dot point, continuing to work on the design and delivery of new statues and monuments to commemorate Aboriginal leaders And then I see then rather than wait, we see the balancing point that features as the first dot point of targets for 25-26, which is still on the planning side, continuing to plan and assist with the delivery of 6 statues to commemorate Aboriginal South Australians. It's more or less expressed in the same terms. One talks about Aboriginal leaders, another one talks about Aboriginal South Australians. Substantively, we're talking, though, about, on the one hand, a highlight, which was the continued work on the design and delivery of those new statues, and then the target is continuing to plan and assist with the delivery. Now, do we read anything into that in terms of any progress that's been made? We've already addressed the fact that money has been brought forward now from several years ago.
The choice of the words, I don't think you can read anything into. You could have almost repeated the top one to the bottom one, but yeah, I do know that there has been significant work that has happened. For a number of reasons, including just needing to seek permission of family, etc. I won't talk about exactly where we are, but there has been significant work that's been undertaken on those, and I wouldn't read anything into the words that are used to denote a difference between the highlights and the targets.
Well, and then perhaps to just...
Except by the time 25-26 rolls around, it'll be more advanced than it was the year before.
Okay, well that sounds good. And only because the minister's reflected on it earlier, by reference to the second paragraph on page 17. Would the minister, in hindsight, say to the committee that this is one of those areas where it might have actually been better to have, in terms of forward estimates 4 years ago, 3 and a bit years ago, 0.0001 million at the end, rather than it being front loaded? Is this a question of as it's turned out, or what do we know so far?
Yeah. Well, maybe given where we are now in the 4th year of the current government, knowing everything that we know now, you might have put it in as reflected it differently, so it wasn't in the the middle, what is it, the second and third, or third and the 4th year, 500 each. Loading it a bit more towards the end, perhaps.
All right. We'll put it this way: has any of that money, has any of the $1 million been spent at all?
Yeah, my advice is in the order of $200,000 has been spent.
Okay, well, it features as the second highlight, and that highlight describes work.
Yep.
So there's been work. Has that all happened in the last financial year?
Yeah, my advice is yes, I think so.
Okay, and what has that been constituted by? What's it comprised of?
Yeah, it's commissioning getting ready for that first statue, but once again, I won't go into details of it.
No.
But it is in relation to the process of getting statues. The processes that are, I never knew, but quite intricate in terms of how these things are done and made, etc., etc.
I appreciate that. I'm not going to press the minister for a whole variety of reasons. The government might want to make announcements and in its own time and all the rest, and there might be other reasons. But suffice to say, have the subjects of the 6 monuments been determined?
I think it's fair to say, no, not all of them. There has been a couple of process that former Commissioner for Aboriginal Engagement, Dr Roger Thomas, ran early in this term of government to suggest some names. It is certainly something that we intend to have a discussion. It won't be determined, but have discussion with the representative voice about some of those further ones.
Well, so have any of the subjects of the monuments been determined?
But once again, so I'm happy to say work has progressed, but there will be more to come in the coming months about it.
Right, but have any of the subjects of the monuments been determined?
Work has progressed, and there'll be more to come in the coming months about that.
That sounds like, it doesn't sound like an answer. I want to say it sounds like no.
Well, no, I wouldn't necessarily read that way, but more will be said in the coming months.
So it's possible that some, but not all of the subjects of the monuments have been determined, but is there some reason why the Minister isn't able or elects not to tell the committee that?
Yeah, work has progressed, and there'll be more that we'll have to say about in the coming months.
All right. So, and there's been no additional money that's been identified over and above the amount that was first identified in the 2022 budget, the $1 million.
Yep.
So there's 800,000 left.
I think, yes, approximately, but I will go back and check and take it on notice, because I'm as well to double check.
Okay. This is about $800,000 left. There's been $200,000 of work on, it must be, because it's a highlight of 24-25, design and delivery of the new statues and monuments. So what does design and delivery mean in this sense? In that this committee's not to know, at least at this stage, whether or not that design and delivery includes work on the design and delivery of a monument in respect of a chosen subject. Is it to rewind to our engagement a little earlier on forensic science, is it a matter of identifying the land on which the monument might?
There will be more in the coming months that we'll be able to say about this. Just not in a position at this stage.
Not in a position to say anything else?
No, but as I said, more happy to share more in the coming months. I know that the member for Flinders is very interested in...
Highlight the budget.
I want
some information about the highlight.
It's the second highlight.
I can tell you, during the 2024-2025 financial year, there has been work on the design and delivery.
That's what the highlight says.
I know.
$200,000 worth of it.
And it's the number one target of for 25-26. Well, not number one, first dot point.
Yeah, for the benefit of the member, and I'm not sure if the member in his time as performing the functions of the Attorney General went through an estimates process, but these are not in priority order. These are...
No.
These are
Sure.
Dot points. There's not a 1, 2, 3, 4 next to them, but yes, it is one of the dot points.
All right. So they're all equal.
It is one of the dot points.
Okay. It features as the first stated dot point.
All right, but again,
all right.
please, I don't want the member to take it that there's a hierarchical order of the dot points on the page. They are. It might not be that all dot points. It might not be. It might not be that all dot points are created equal. There may be some that we are more important, but I wouldn't take the position on the page as a definitive indicator of that.
What's really abundantly clear is that this is a matter of sufficient importance to the government that not only did it appear prominently as an election commitment, but it's appeared with this level of prominence in both highlights and targets for each budget that we've seen under this government. And it's described somewhat differently in terms of its description in the highlights than it is in the targets. We don't read too much into that. But what's clear is that the target for 25-26 is clearly not raising expectations too much, in that it's very clearly characterised in terms of the continuation of a planning and assisting phase, it's not indicating that it is actually the achievement of the delivery, completion and so on of 6 monuments, and the Minister hasn't gone as far as to identify any subject of a monument, and has at least made it clear to the committee that the balance of subjects, if not all of them, are yet to be determined, and we're nearly, 4 years on, and we're talking about funding having been moved into another year. So that's all there on the face of the budget papers. Is there anything else the Minister is able to say to this committee about the completion of the delivery of the election commitment, to put it that bluntly?
If I had a date when it was all going to be completed by, I would give it to you. I don't have a completion date, and certainly this work, certainly when it was thought of, was hoped and anticipated might be a continuing sort of work, that it wouldn't just be this number, but it might encourage further investment in statues of Aboriginal people right around South Australia by other organisations or groups or councils as well.
All right. The Minister's mentioned Dr. Thomas. Did the services of anyone outside of the Aboriginal Affairs and Reconciliation contribute to that cost? And is there anything else that the Minister can to say to the committee about the constituent parts of that 200,000 that's been spent?
I don't have details here with me, but I can see what I can bring back.
Will you take that on notice?
I'll take that on notice.
Thanks very much. Sorry?
Minister, just in regards to, the Aboriginal Affairs program speaks about providing whole of government policy advice and leadership on page 16 as an overall. I'm interested in what involvement your agency might have had in the development and upcoming finalisation of the Aboriginal Enterprise Procurement Strategy. Is that something that you've been working hand in hand with Treasury on? It's something which a lot of organisations within my electorate in particular are sort of interested in making sure there's opportunities to be able to get involved in the different levels of providing service and otherwise to government. Is this something your department's been involved in directly?
It's certainly in a whole range of areas, including procurement. It's something that I know that comes across my desk and gets sought for advice or thoughts about such things. There is a very powerful way that government can directly help and benefit Aboriginal people's businesses and communities through procurement. We buy a lot as a government, as other levels of government do as well, and looking to see where we can support First Nations enterprises. It is an important way we can provide that economic independence.
Has your department been working with Treasury? One of their targets for Treasury in Budget Paper 4, Volume 4, page 162 is specifically about the development of that procurement strategy. Is that something you're...
Where were we referring?
Sorry.
Without saying the exact page up, I am advised that very regularly Aboriginal Affairs provide advice and input on a whole range of
on that particular procurement strategy?
I don't have the budget paper in front of me, but on a whole range of areas they provide advice, as I do as Minister as well.
Thanks, Chair. I'm still at the page 16. Highlights and targets, and in terms of highlights 24-25, we see at I think it's the fourth of those highlights. There's work with South Australian Fire Emergency Services Commission to create Aboriginal cultural heritage maps of the state for use in emergency and disaster events. Is there anything the Minister can provide to inform the committee of the use of Aboriginal cultural heritage maps in emergency or disaster events?
I can provide a bit of information. I know from when I am out meeting with traditional owners that particularly after the River Murray flood events, this came up when there necessarily needed to be very quick responses. The taking of soil and sand to fill sandbags and placing them at different places that was needing a very, very quick response. And I know some of the feedback that I'd received in visiting Aboriginal communities in the River Murray area during and after that flooding event was that there was maybe a bit of a lack of proactive understanding of what is there. When local councils or emergency services go into its end, that they don't know is there any knowledge that this could be a burial ground or have important Aboriginal culturally modified trees in there. So particularly as a result of some of the feedback in relation to the River Murray flood events, there is now a signed memorandum of administrating agreement between with SafeCom, and as part of the program, Aboriginal Affairs are now, and it's just in the very start of this program, but are looking to research and prepare a method for developing a digital heat map of Aboriginal heritage across the state. So it wouldn't replace the central archive, the central register of Aboriginal sites and objects, but be able to provide some sort of heat map that in emergency situation or emergency services could use to mitigate the risk of impacting upon Aboriginal heritage.
With the highlight talks in terms of creating these maps. Yep. Obviously that's based on existing knowledge, but the creating process presumably referable to the map for the purpose, and I think the Minister sort of partly addressed that point, but by reference perhaps to the flood, can the Minister advise the committee information about the use of those maps to the extent that they have been created, and perhaps outline the process of creating the map and are copies available?
You have 2 minutes on the clock, Member for Hyson.
My advice is that there isn't a map that's finalised and been published, but the way that I'm advised that this is intended to be rolled out is on a local level, local emergency services working with traditional owner groups in the area to develop that sort of understanding and a map in those local areas, rather than something that is done on a complete statewide basis. But my advice is with local emergency services group and TOs.
But there is no such map in existence?
No, it is being developed. It's work that's... So
it hasn't been deployed in terms of the flood, but that's an example of the kind of thing?
No. And I gave, in terms of the flood response, certainly that really gave rise to awareness of why this would be beneficial.
Right.
So no, it certainly wasn't developed for the flood event.
But it's a highlight again.
Yep.
Once created, the map would then be available to a local CFS SES brigade, would it?
And that's my advice, that's the intention. But also I think from my memory of, again, talking to Aboriginal groups and those responders in the River Murray, it wasn't just the state emergency services, but often local councils who were doing a lot of the work in terms of the sandbags and the moving of soil to influence water flows.
Well, so that's pretty kind of generalised explanation. Is there any particular cost associated with the creation of the maps? And is there any sort of centralised protocol in terms of once created, the custodianship of the maps, will they be as accessible as possible, including for those local purposes, but sort of centrally and coherently able to be sort of drawn upon? For example, if you were to roll in as Minister to a local area and say, hey, have you got any of those maps that were created? If so, where are they? I don't have them because they're in the local area. Or is there also a carbon copy that's sent to Aboriginal Affairs and Reconciliation?
Yeah, I'll have to take them on notice. I don't have that minutiae of operational detail. As I understand, there has been a memorandum of administrative agreement signed with Safecom, but I'm happy to go away and see what I can bring back in terms of some more of that detail.
Excellent. That being the case, the allotted time having expired,